Welcome back. We're talking with Laura Gutsteiner. She's an investigative reporter looking into the next housing crisis. Laura, before we went to break, we were just getting into the discussion about home prices rising and ownership dropping. Can you please continue that?
Sure. So right now we're experiencing a paradoxical situation. Home prices are rising. Sometimes they're rising very rapidly in cities like Phoenix, in areas of Nevada, and places in Chicago and New York, for example. Simultaneously, we are seeing the homeownership rate dropping nationally. So what's going on? That's what a lot of economists have recently been saying. What's going on? It's quite clear what's going on. Institutional investors who are not actually going to live in those properties, but are simply using them for their speculative value, are buying up tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these homes, holding on to them and using it to make massive profits while not actually allowing individual families the opportunity to have a stable and safe place to live.
So how is that a threat? Can you explain why they don't have a safe place to live if that's the case?
Sure. So the challenge is that wealth accumulation and economic stability in this country has always been tied to home ownership. Whether or not we could change that model, we certainly could. But at this moment right now, renting has never really been a means towards accumulating wealth. Home ownership has been a means towards accumulating intergenerational wealth. So if your family owns a house, they can use that to pay for your college. They can use that to open a business, for example, small business. What's happening right now as institutional investors are buying these houses cheap and then renting them back to the very families, sometimes that were foreclosed on, is we're seeing this theft of wealth from the future generation. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, all of these families will not have accumulated any wealth. They'll simply have been paying their rental checks to Wall Street. And we're going to see repercussions of this for the next generation who don't have the money to pay for their college education, who can't start businesses. And this is particularly important when we look at racial disparities of wealth and assets in this country. African American families, Hispanic families do not have the same rates of home ownership as white American families do not have the same amount of wealth amassed as white Americans do. And so when we see these institutional investors, particularly going into communities of color, buying up these homes and then renting them back to families, we're really seeing the seeds of future racial disparities in wealth, in access, and in economic equality, all being sowed today in what everyone's heralding as an economic recovery.
Well,
Who
Laura,
is this economic recovery for?
Would the concentration of properties in fewer hands result in economies of scale, allowing families to live for less?
It would be great if that were true. There's really no indication. In fact, the only indication is that it's going to be the opposite. And there's two main reasons for why. One is that companies like Blackstone Group and other private equity firms have all been implicated in lawsuits about price fixing, meaning that they collude with others in their industry because they're so big and there's not many of them in order to either drive prices up or drive prices down in a way that benefits them and makes them money.
So has your investigation revealed that, in fact, a market monopoly is occurring in the housing market right now?
Right now, we don't have any evidence of collusion because this has just started. However, Blackstone and other private equity companies are currently in lawsuits about collusion in other industries for price fixing. So it's really not a far stretch of the imagination to imagine that they would do the same in this industry. But I think the thing that also is important to note is from everyone I have spoken to, every report I have read, every comment section that I have scrolled through, very few tenants of Blackstone, of these institutional investors, are saying that these properties are actually managed well. The vast majority are saying that the Blackstone Group and other institutional investors are bad property managers. They don't get the repairs done. They don't manage the rental checks well. They're not timely in doing any of the business that's important. And that, to me, is a very serious problem, not only because it means that tens of thousands of families are going to be living in indecent conditions, but it also means that if Blackstone's a bad enough property manager, it's not going to be successful with its rental-backed security. And if these securities become widespread and then fail, we could see repercussions across the entire economy.
So you believe that this is leading up to an absolute crash in the rental market, housing market?
I think that it is making the rental market and the entire housing market more unstable. I think it is moving away from valuing the actual needs of individual families and a long-term stability of the for-profit housing market. Instead, it is moving towards exploiting families for their rental checks and also leading to the increased financialization, increased securitization, and increased instability and emphasis on short-term profit rather than long-term solid growth.
Now, what could happen to families who are still struggling from the last crash if another one occurs?
We saw that the last crash was a spectacular transfer of wealth and power away from ordinary Americans and to Wall Street and to financial institutions. If there were to be another crash, I anticipate that it would be a very similar thing. We're still dealing with the repercussions of this crash. All of the austerity measures, the fact that food stamps were just cut, all of this, the fact that Detroit is in municipal bankruptcy and other cities might be headed towards it soon, all of this is related to the last crash, and all of it indicates the fact that we have not learned our lesson, and we're blaming the very people that were victimized by the crash and making families earning $15,000, $20,000 a year pay for Wall Street's crimes by cutting their food stamps. We're going in the wrong direction on this one, and the securitization of the single-family rental market is certainly another step in the wrong direction.
This December marks the 100-year anniversary of the birth of the Federal Reserve System, the same system that bailed out countless institutions with trillions of dollars. What role do you think they'll play in this next crash that you have revealed?
I have not seen, they've been keeping interest rates very low, which has fueled a lot of these institutional investor purchases of these foreclosed homes. The biggest issue is just that we don't see the Federal Reserve and we don't see Washington setting financial policy that benefits ordinary Americans. I think that if we want to take that seriously, if we want to take seriously the idea that our national economic policy should benefit everyday Americans, we need to start seeing not non-industry, insiders being at the Federal Reserve and making the policy in Washington. So as long as we have this revolving door between Wall Street and K Street, we're never really going to see the priorities of Washington change. And that, to me, is one of the most important things that we should have learned from the financial crisis, but we don't seem to have learned yet.
So you think the policies are being formulated too far away from the affected individuals and then thus being ineffective?
Institutions. And they're being formulated to amass great wealth on Wall Street with this idea that we know is false, that this wealth is going to trickle down. There's no indication that this wealth trickles down. And as we move towards increased economic inequality, we have to know and we have to be aware of the fact that this makes the entire country more unstable, not just economically, but socially and politically as well.
Laura, what can be done to prevent this?
We have to organize. It's very clear. The government is not, and certainly Wall Street are not going to change tact or change their policies, stop wanting to make short-term spectacular profits anytime soon. What has been incredibly successful is when communities come together to organize and stop foreclosure and stop displacement. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen grandmothers stopping their foreclosure, preventing their eviction. I've seen families taking over bank-owned homes in Chicago, in LA, in North Carolina. We need to be doing that type of on-the-ground, door-knocking, community organizing on a massive scale if we want to see any type of political change anytime soon. It's the thing that led to the civil rights movement. It's the thing that led to, the changes after the Great Depression. If we want to come out of this recovery with a real recovery, we need to start enacting it on the ground. It's not going to come from above.
All right, Laura, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
All right, that was Laura Gutsteiner right here on WHDT World News. Stay tuned. We have the rest of today's headlines, all of the news from Hollywood, California, and a full report on the weather coming up. Stay tuned.